welcome to the ICT Pulse podcast, and welcome to our first community chat of 2019. I'm Michelle Marius, your host and the editor and publisher of ICT Pulse, the online platform where we discuss ICT issues from a Caribbean perspective. Joining me today are two newcomers to ICT Pulse and our community chat, but I'm delighted they can join us. Allison James is a manager at KPMG for Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean countries and is based in Barbados. She has a hybrid background as a chartered accountant and a certified information systems auditor. And Steve Spence is the Chief Technology Officer at Architects, Inc., an IT solutions provider headquartered in Florida. But Stephen operates out of the firm's Trinidad and Tobago office, for which he's also the country manager. Allison and Steve, welcome to the ICT Pulse podcast.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. Thank you.
So in this community chat, we'll be discussing two topics. First, single window platforms, the risks and reward, which Allison submitted for discussion. And then the impact of Internet Exchange Point, IXPs, on the viability of data centers in the Caribbean, which Stephen proposed. Okay, so let's get started. Single window platforms have become a buzz term across the Caribbean, with many countries indicating that they're moving towards adopting such platforms, particularly for trade and border clearance related activities. Allison, from an ICT related perspective, are you concerned that Caribbean governments are jumping on the single window platform bandwagon and not carefully considering the pros and cons?
Yes, Michelle. Actually, I am having that concern right now. The benefits go without saying. Things such as increased productivity, decreased time and cost to do business, increasing our ease of doing business index, which needs to be brought up to make ourselves more attractive for foreign investors. I think that some of the basics, such as the cultural of the region, the access to reliable infrastructure, the aptitude of our people to use the technology, as well as the regulations surrounding ICT and cybersecurity in the region, cause some concerns with regards to actually implementing this type of platform.
Okay. Stephen, you have any thoughts?
Actually, I'm kind of very interested in what we call open government, are using ICT to actually increase efficiency of government and government processes. So I'm very enthusiastic about the initiatives going on. And as well, I share the fear that different governments are actually doing their own thing and they're not planning things enough together, and probably should be addressed probably at the CARICOM level in terms of getting systems more harmonized so that the Caribbean peoples can actually benefit from a fairly uniform or consistent system across the region.
Understood. But Allison, one of the things that I think, and it probably certainly dovetails into what you're saying, whereby, you know, we hear about single window platforms, but what really happens is that you have a number of different entities supposedly setting up a single window platform, when what you probably have is, or what ought to obtain is, a sort of more cohesive and comprehensive structure that allows end-to-end processing without, for example, if by chance customs might be a good place where they have a single window platform. Many countries in the region are using Asicuda World, which facilitates that. But if by chance you have some agricultural product that you're trying to import or export, you need to then get your requisite permits and so on from the Ministry of Agriculture before you then can begin to interact with the customs platform, when all of this is all part of trade and border clearance activities.
Yes, exactly. And that speaks to when I talk about culture, because as you said, the process has to be streamlined as well across the different agencies. So it's not as simple as implementing a system and expecting miracles to happen. The system actually is supposed to function within the context of society, within the context of the people, the culture, and their processes as well. So without even considering those aspects, you will have a system implemented, but in all rights and intents or purposes, it's designed to fail.
I actually like the idea because I personally I'm a regionalist in that sense, and I think that so anything that encourage trade or make trade between the islands much easier and simpler has to be something that we prioritize. So I know what is going on there. Sometimes we just take third party software from outside, or individual governments go out and get third party software that don't necessarily are the best for the region and integrate them. And often, instead of making it easier for people to export stuff, it's become more complex. It become harder for people to interact. They're not taking advantage of that everybody have a cell phone, everybody have a mobile phone, and the systems must be able to run on these devices. So a farmer who wants to export from St. Vincent to Jamaica, it become easier for them to exchange, to interact with the regulations, to get clearance, and for the government to track the movements of goods and services between the islands. So I like the principle. What I fear is the implementation of these systems that is not being implemented with the region's unique requirements in mind, which is what allows software and ICT to succeed. Being aware of local context, and systems can do that if we are mindful of how we actually implement them.
Yes, and I agree with what you're saying, Steve. And I would like to just expand a bit more on a concept that I was introduced to. I mean, in terms of using the ICT and the single window platforms to actually boost the CARICOM single market economy. One drawback usually discussed with regards to doing business in the Caribbean is the size of the market space. And, there's the theory that having a further integration regionally of the single window platforms would help bolster that market space and create a broader platform for our people to do business within the region. And of course, the benefits to foreign reserves, the benefits to our competitive advantages and our sustainable development go without saying.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it's a kind of weird dream I have about regional trade, that with the proper systems in place, people can probably reduce their need for, between the Caribbean islands, we actually trade use US dollars as a de facto currency to trade. I was thinking that with the proper systems in place, we could use a cryptocurrency instead and probably reduce the pressure on our foreign reserves in terms of intra-island trade. And that if the proper systems are in place, I kind of envision a place where individuals, farmers, small retailers, everybody can actually be able to find each other, number one, and also able to trade with each other, number one, without the complexity of having to learn how to go through regulation, how to register as a company. That whole process become extremely streamlined, and anybody with the connectivity can actually do it. Because right now we do have the devices in place, we do have the networks in place. What we don't have is the opportunity to actually take advantage of those systems right now.
Yes, I think that would actually help increase trade as well. However, as we grow in terms of our use of technologies, we need to still make sure that we have those robust support systems in place. And cybersecurity is an area that is, I believe, under recognized in the region. And to the mere fact that when you look at the ICT regulations, they leave a lot to be desired across the board. We don't have any real protection from data privacy breaches. We don't have any requirements on companies to share information when they are attacked. And that in itself could really crumble the entire whole process.
Okay.
It's my opinion.
No, it's true. I think because I guess the region don't see it as a priority as yet. It's not important enough, and to some degree, data security is a kind of a black box that people don't really understand. They fear it to some degree, but it's something that happens to somebody else. It doesn't happen to me.
Yeah.
Let me just use this technology and just put all my data and my trust in the technology. But I'm really sure how this thing works. Okay, in terms of protecting me. Okay. I can put my credit card in, I can put all my business data on this cloud system, but I'm not entirely sure how and be protected. And yes, the region and the governments in particular are not fully connected with the consequences of some of those things, because they're not really seeing the importance of the technology and the economy in that sense. They're still very hands-on and very tactable and physical things. They're not seeing this hidden economy that's growing, that's expanding, and they're not really seeing that they need to also put protection in place for their people and also for their economies. So yes, I don't know if it's education, in particular at government level. I don't know if it's the older people, they're not really connected with the stuff.
Yeah.
That because sometimes you have to have a good advisor to the Prime Minister for that to work properly, because the Prime Minister don't necessarily really appreciate the stuff. So yeah, it's an idea, because we've been talking. I work with the CTU sometimes in terms of awareness, and it is an ongoing process to educate government officials, civil servants about the importance of this area. So yeah, it's a struggle in my mind. How do you bridge a gap between just putting your head in the sand and just hoping that it works, and just saying that no, you need to do more than that. You need to put laws in place. You need to put measures in place to protect people.
Question. Steve, you had spoken about e-government early on, and I just want whether or not we can touch on that with respect to the single window platforms, because I think we all have been hearing about governments, e-government and governments moving more to e-government and that sort of thing. But we really haven't made the progress that one would have hoped we would have by now. But here it is that with e-government, you're really looking at, more cohesive processes within government, which mirrors that of the single window platform. So I think that there may be some link between the two. I don't know what you think, and Allison, if you can chime in afterwards.
Well, e-government is a bigger picture, and I will give you the theory or the vision behind it. Is to, in a liberal or free society, the people or the citizens supposed to have access to information about the government, about their countries, about their resources, and the electronic media or the electronic technologies are supposed to be able to allow that to happen much more effectively and efficiently. That's the theory behind it. And in that process, I also add to it also the economical benefit as well. One of the metrics for judging the ease of doing business in a country is the ability to, for example, register a company. If that process takes 2 months, that's not a very efficient process. You're actually holding back the country. If you're in customs and if your goods take 3-4 days to clear from customs because you have to get this form, you have to work with this stockbroker. Again, those are factors that impact your agility, your flexibility as a small. Because, for example, small business, it will be the meat and potatoes of the Caribbean region. The big companies are not the way to go. Okay, so therefore, the economy right now is tuned towards big regional companies. What you want to have now is small, agile companies that can easily and nimbly move stuff and services across.
Yes.
And number two, we are able to get the permits and the regulations very, very, very easily. So in the big picture, e-government promises you all that, but in theory, it's fairly difficult to do. Even large countries have problems getting it to work. But I think if we have sufficient champions, what we really need in the region is that champion that this sort of process. I think that is the context in which we can get it to move forward. So I'm working with some people to kind of say how we can get that to move process, but we don't have a government champion or somebody in government that's actually say, yes, I like this idea, I'm going to push this idea.
To add to what Stephen is saying, I think that some steps to actually getting to that implementation point, because even when you look at the single window platform ideology, this is not a new topic. This has been discussed from at least 10 years ago, but it still has not truly been realized in the region. I think that we need to have more public-private sector discussions on how to really implement it and to really discuss how we're going to finance it, because that is one barrier to its implementation. We have to talk hardcore IT because we need to understand how we're going to have the network access configured, how we're going to have system interoperability, and how we're going to have the user rights assigned to different agencies. We even need to talk legislation, which again is not being brought to the fore. We have to talk people because we still need to get our people to a state of readiness in terms of how they view and how they use and how they interact with IT systems. So I think those things could probably add to the discussion on how to actually take it from the conceptual stage to actual realization.
Definitely. Okay, well, we probably need to start to wrap up this topic. Any last thoughts, Steve?
I'd say it's an interesting area. I think in terms of all government, we're looking for a killer app, and I think open window, single window application is one of the areas, killer apps that we can go after. Taxation, I guess that's the next one I could think of. We need to go after in terms of making our systems streamlined, information easily accessed to people, and allow our rules for trade to be easily harmonized. So I think that is something that I know it's an old topic because I'm hearing about this for almost 10, 15 years now. In some form or fashion, I've been seeing tenders. I even bid on a tender for it once for to go in the platform. So I know it's been around a long time, but we're not seeing the benefits of it as yet. And I think that it's about time that we get our act together.
Yes.
Definitely. One of the things, though, that I guess just sort of dovetailing on what you're saying, Steve, is I wonder to what extent, we really planned these sorts of massive initiatives. Because as Allison was saying, infrastructure, there are cultural considerations, there is the legal and policy aspects as well. And really whether or not we may have tried, with supposedly to have this far reaching and comprehensive thing, and then we just ran out of either money and or stamina. And somehow it has fallen short, because oftentimes we focus a lot on the technology, which is important, but at the same time people are what drive the whole thing, and whether the extent to which the change management process is being implemented and how early it's being implemented and what it entails, and the adjustments in procedures that might be required, etc. You're really not sure whether or not all of these things are being given thought or sufficient thought.
Yes, you're good. That's exactly the problem, I think, in the long run, that we need to get the people component right. If not done properly, I've known cases where the unions actually fight it. Yes, there was a case in which I know government minister that was trying to get the customs harmonized, and he was resisted by the government, by the trade unions, but I think it's how he approached it. You need to sell people, sell the different stakeholders properly.
Absolutely. Allison, since this was your topic, just wrap us up, please.
First, just to comment a bit on what Stephen was speaking about with regards to trade unions being against it in some cases. I think one key factor in that has to do with the fear of our jobs being taken over by computers. And that speaks a lot to how we are upskilling our people to satisfy the needs of the changes in the digital transformation era. And in summary, I think that we need to just get it done. I see here in Barbados, for example, the government has gone to an online to streamline the tax information systems. So whereas you would have had various agencies that dealt with different taxes, there's now one platform. And I'm a bit optimistic about the future and what it says. Maybe we're going to see many implementations of the single window, and then hopefully further integration of that. But I still see the need for us to ensure that the legislations and the cybersecurity aspects, the risks that are involved, are being handled properly, because all the benefits to this implementation can be totally negated by something as simple as the data privacy breach. And I wouldn't want to see the repercussions, especially when we have the GDPR legislation in our face, to see how the region would recover from that.
Excellent. Absolutely. Okay, moving right along. So, Steve, you're up to bat. Internet exchange points. It's a topic that's close to my heart. It was one of the earliest articles I wrote for ICT Pulse when we started way back in 2011. And at that time, there were really just a handful of IXPs across the region. Now, well over half of the countries have one. But it may be argued that IXPs are not fulfilling their true potential, at least here in the region. So, Steve, you seem to be concerned about the impact of IXPs on the viability of data centers in the region. But tell us whether or not the concern is in a good or bad way. Is it that IXPs are hindering the development of data centers, or somehow we are not aware to the extent to which IXPs could enhance, data centers operating in the region?
Let me put it this way. The argument of the bigger guys is that the region don't need data centers. That's usually their mantra.
Mm-hmm.
So if you contact Microsoft or Google or even the carriers that we have, Cayman Wireless and the rest of them, they said that essentially that the region is too small for data centers and that we should consume all our content in the US or in Europe. And one of the arguments is that we don't have IXPs. And IXPs actually are essential ingredients for data centers to actually exist. Now, why do we need data centers? Data centers are needed because, number one, it moves the data closer to where it's consumed. So therefore, better performance, get better experience, quicker response, also a certain degree of resilience in case cables get cut or, certain outages happening in the US or in the Europe right now. Right now, all our data is in the US. If a cable get cut or there's some major issue in the US part of the internet, we lose, or effectively, we are actually part of the US in that sense. So in terms of resiliency, the region does need to actually be able to access this data when it wants, independent of anything that's going outside the region. The other part of the whole thing as well is the economy of the countries involved in that. Part of the evolution, we have IXPs, then we have data centers, businesses can actually host their data locally in country. Now, there's some issue of privacy. You don't want to have your data that is sensitive, that it may be accessible in terms of legal access. The US can access data because those companies are US companies that are obligated to do anything the US government asks them to do. And so therefore, there's the issue of control and right to access that data. A lot of people are uncomfortable with their data not being outside country, especially governments, and that's one of the restrictions on open government. A lot of governments want their data local. They want to have access to the data and know what is their data doing, and that's in country itself. So those are some issues that we need to address in terms of how data centers evolve. So IXPs is one of the essential components for that to even exist. Now that we have IXPs and if we use them effectively, the next step is supposed to be a number of different data centers that's popping up on the horizon and offering a whole bunch of services to small and medium business owners right here and there. As a next step, apart from the fact that it will actually stimulate the economy, because that's a business that people can actually go into. There's no other services that can be accessed and offered locally that will stimulate and drive the small microeconomies of the Caribbean.
So, Allison, what are your thoughts?
I think that the internet exchange points is a black box in the region. I don't think that everyone is aware of what they are or the benefits that can be attained from having IXPs in the region, and not just having them, but for them to be used, because I'm aware that there are a number of IXPs in the region. However, based on some research, a lot of companies don't use them for one reason or the other. And I echo Steve's points with regards to the benefits, especially in terms of the reduction in transit costs of moving data and the autonomy over that data, especially since we could be considered to be a good location for a disaster recovery site, and having IXPs that do not necessarily have to go through the US would be an additional business case for the region.
One of the things, though, that I have been sort of grappling with, because in previous lives I've had to do like assessments as to whether companies should set up data centers in the region. And, there tend to be two glaring challenges. One is the location of the countries, or most of the countries, specifically that the fact that we're in, this hurricane belt. Many of these countries are subject to the severe weather systems on an annual basis, and the cost of electricity. So while, let's say, countries like Trinidad, maybe Ghana, and Curacao and so on, where a data center does exist, are generally outside of the hurricane belt. Most of the other Caribbean islands in some way, shape or form tend to be subject to hurricanes on an annual basis. And of course, cost of fuel tends to be quite high in most countries. So, I mean, is there really a solid business case for companies to set up data centers in the region?
Let me try to support that idea. Those examples are very good examples of why we shouldn't have data centers in the Caribbean. But then I would say Trinidad, Curacao, Guyana, and now probably Belize are probably the locations that are least affected by natural disasters. However, around the world, people have that same issue with data centers, okay? The benefits in terms of stimulating the economy, consuming data near, I think, offload those things. Now, the biggest factor that would affect us is really the cost of energy to actually run those data centers. Now, again, the technology has started to kind of help us in that era. There are now warm, what we call hot data centers that allow us to run data centers at higher temperatures. There are now renewable energy initiatives that are powering, because the data centers don't have to be massive and big as the ones that we normally see traditionally. There now are more nimble ways to actually run data centers. So therefore, technology is now kind of helping us to do that. And I think the benefit of having these centers close to the population that are consuming them far outweighs the risk involved, as well as in some ways, because we have IXPs through the regions, we can basically offload redundant data to other islands. We don't have to offload it to America. We can offload it to Trinidad. We can if Montserrat has a problem, they can access data that's in Trinidad. So therefore, what we offer once we have enough redundant data in the region itself, we kind of offset the impact of a hurricane coming to the region. So therefore, I think that the advantages of hosting offshore that legitimate business model in which people don't want the data in the US, both for regional owners and for external owners as well. I think that's a opportunity for the region. Offshore banking is popular in the Caribbean, and so therefore hosting data outside the US is also a popular option as well. And we should not allow the fact that we have some challenges to actually not stop us from stepping into that arena. So therefore, there are challenges, admittedly, but with every business, there's always some downside. Okay, we have to make it work by offsetting these downside with some sort of technology answer or some sort of system and policy that allows to protect people's data while still aware that we have this risk involved.
I agree with what Steve is saying, and I think it also speaks to the need for us to view the region as a unified whole. And yes, there will be hurricanes every year, but at no point in time will a hurricane hit every island at any one time.
Definitely.
I made that same comment to a Microsoft representative once. Said, no, they haven't yet to see a hurricane that hit every island all at once.
Exactly.
And I definitely take your point about there probably needs to be a more regional approach. Steve, do you think that we need some sort of regional IXP as opposed to just having IXPs in individual countries?
I would say no. You don't really need one. This is from a purely architectural point of view. Architecturally, once you have enough redundant IXPs and cables connecting each island, you don't need to have a common IXP that all data go through. And effectively, the data centers in Florida effectively act as a regional IXP. To be truthful, so I don't think we need one architecturally. Once we have the fiber between the islands, that will create the redundancy that we need, actually. So I know people talk about that. Now, the next component of IXP is that this is really a kind of low-level or foundational IXP. To some degree, a lot of people don't need to actually know about IXP or care about IXPs. That's one component that this is more for the engineers and the providers to be aware of. The providers and the engineers are the architects who design the network in the Caribbean. They're the ones that actually need to be aware of this thing. But from a business point of view, they will really benefit from this foundational stuff, but they don't really need to be aware to even know that it even exists. Okay, they're getting faster internet, they're getting better VoIP services, they're getting better everything as a result of the IXP. But the real people who need to be aware of this architecture are the engineers, the providers, and therein lie the problem. The providers have a rather narrow view of business, and they think that if they share data or share points of convergence, that they're somehow helping out their competitors. They're not seeing the big picture, the long-term picture of a bigger economy, more people using the internet benefits everybody. They're not seeing it that way. They still see it as I take in all, I win, I take all. They're not seeing that, the economy that we see now is just a small shadow of what it could be. and that if I invest in some shared resources, we could actually grow this economy way beyond what it is now. And that's part of the problem, that our major providers are what are myopic. They see it as winner take all, rather than, hey, share some resources, let us compete on the quality of our services, and then more people will use our services. More people will come to the region to use services. A lot of people who die to move a business in the Caribbean. But the only reason they don't move in the Caribbean is because they said internet connectivity poor. If we have good internet connectivity, to guarantee redundancy, people will move their offices to the Caribbean and hence increase the size of the economy. But our business leaders in the carrier industry not really playing ball very well, and that's actually the problem right there. Then
I think that one reason that there may be that problem with the business leaders is, as you correctly said, they don't necessarily have to get involved in the ways of, or the actual IXP operation level discussions, which means that they still see it as, as you said, they may not even be aware of it or of its importance. And the discussion needs to be taken from outside of just the IT realm and taken into the boardrooms and into the business realm as well, where they can see from a strategic standpoint the needs for having these changes in how we do business. Until we get that bridging of gaps between the IT and the business mindsets, we won't necessarily see the progress we would want to see.
yeah, correct. In Trinidad, there's 2 IXPs right now. Every time I test to see if the people using them, is not being used. The 2 providers, or 3 or 4 providers that we have here, are not playing well to each other. They use every excuse not to use the IXP, which is kind of sad in that sense.
That's the same thing we see here in Barbados as well too, and I really wonder why. What is the real reason behind that?
I think it's a player take all. We don't want to seem to be competitive. Yes, which is true, but also the economy is just too small to be so myopic. We need to grow this economy. We want to make the economy attractive. We want to say that, the Caribbean islands are a well-connected economy. We want to say that a set of business that will attract a set of business interests, but they don't see it that way. They see that, okay, there's 1 million people in Trinidad. Okay, we can only get about 100,000 people use my services. I want all those 100,000 people. That's it. That's how they design the system. That's how they size the system. They will size the system and say that, okay, Trinidad taking a lot of immigrants, a lot of people coming into the country. In about 10 years' time, we could basically have about 4 million people. 4 million people will want to have IT services. Come on, let's make this place attractive. Okay? They don't see it that way. Okay, they say, they just live in the present and only in the present. Our subscribers will only be maximum 100,000 people. It makes no sense building a network that can size or accommodate a bigger amount. And that's when I think that plague the kind of present mentality rather than a future mentality, which what is the world we want to build, what kind of economy we want to grow into, and what we need to invest in today in order to grow tomorrow. And it's very annoying. They come to meetings and promise everything, but yet in reality, they don't do that much.
Absolutely. So I think we probably need to begin to wrap up, but I have a question, Steve, and then Allison, if you can chime in thereafter. So for IXPs, I think the general practice is that this is supposed to be a collaboration among players. So, governments really don't mandate, or regulators don't mandate that entities connect to the IXP. But however, as you rightfully said, there's a bigger picture at play. So my question basically is, what could a government do to try to move everybody in the right direction for all intents and purposes? What are your thoughts?
As I said, traditionally is a collaborative. It's almost like a community-like resource that you play with. That's the model that we inherit from the US. But I don't think that will work exactly in the Caribbean. And we have to do different approaches to it. I think in this case, one of the regulator, in this case, part of their job would have to be supervising the interactions and the IXP. We can't escape that. That part of giving a license to a provider is that they have to actually not only promise to use an IXP, but actively send local traffic through the IXP. Any traffic that don't need to go through their international circuit don't need to be there. Just flick straight through to the IXP. And that ability to monitor that thing now will be basically what drives the initial offering. And then I think afterwards, the government can take a hands-off effort. But initially, at the very beginning, in the region itself, I think the government will have to be initially very hands-on, in particular to the regulator, to mandate that some of the bigger players in particular actively use the IXPs. So I think that, and so far, the regulators have been a bit, they have encouraged, they have not demanded that they use the IXPs. But for the region, and because of our cultural anti-competitive behavior that we have, I think the regulator or the government will have to be a little bit more hands-on and in encouraging people to use the IXP.
Allison?
I take the point that governments will have to play their role in this regard, especially when it comes to the change in the mindsets from the biopic style of thinking, as opposed to coming together as a region and making sure that the integration is there as well. I see that the main draw, or the main reasons why we don't have the IXPs being used is this insular type of thinking. And I think once we can get past that, of course, also in terms of having the infrastructure in place so that people are confident in the technology, then we might be able to get some traction in that area.
Okay, well, I do definitely agree with you, Steve, and certainly Allison, as it relates to probably greater, whether it's policy and or regulatory intervention might be required, because clearly we don't necessarily have it at this point in time. And I think in many of the countries, the IXPs really are not functioning as they should. So us to try to progress to other ancillary benefits of having an IXPs we cannot have that conversation as yet. So I definitely agree that we may need to consider a different approach from what currently obtains.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's unfortunate that the business community has seen the opportunity here in terms of government really shouldn't really to do this, but apparently we have to. Because I'm one for free economy, as little government involvement as possible. But here, I think we need to make a concession and get government involved to a greater degree. But part of the problem again is that government officials are not aware of this, how the technology works and how important this thing is. So it kind of impair how much emphasis the governments will actually place on these small but critical policies that allow the digital economy to actually grow and to expand and to take advantage. We need to emphasize that as jobs become more and more automated, our people need to actually start to take advantage of the opportunities that are now opening up in the digital economy.
Definitely. So we need to just wrap up. Allison, any final thoughts generally, whether or not on this topic or the single window or just the experience itself?
I think that we are speaking a lot of the same thing, and in terms of the IT sphere, we are seeing a lot of the barriers to having things implemented. I believe that we need to look at things on a holistic scale, because there are many different moving parts and technology does not stay stagnant at all. We need to be able to take the discussion from the operational level up to the strategic level as well, and make sure that all stakeholders are kept on par with how the different technologies can be used to eventually gain us more sustainable development progress. Because at the end of the day, we all want to maintain our competitive advantage as a region and grow our economies. And we can't do that without using technologies to our advantages, especially in this technological era. The experience on the ICT community chat was great and interesting. I thoroughly enjoyed chatting with both you and Steve. I like the sharing of ideas and hashing things out, and the opportunity to actually get the message out to others in the region on some things that we need to discuss. I think that at this time, we are at a very critical juncture. We cannot stick our heads in the sand. We need to be continually learning and embracing technologies, realizing the risks that are there, and instead of shunning away from it, facing it head on and using our people who we have a We have a good human resource backing. I think we have persons in the region who are very knowledgeable, very competent in a variety of areas. We need to really engage them and see some real benefits to these technologies.
I definitely agree. Steve?
Yeah, actually, in a positive note, I think the region is being dragged into the 21st century, generally. Whether we like it or not, in some form or fashion, will be digitized. Okay? I think I like the fact that more and more people on the street, you go to an airport and you hear, or go by a taxi stand and you hear somebody discussing the cloud. Totally arbitrary person talking about their data is in the cloud. I said, okay, all right. So it's getting out there into the popular conversations of people, and so people are now beginning to be aware, which I like. I like the fact that the more people, the merrier. And so therefore, the region is going to be digitized. I guess in some way we're going to stumble, make mistakes, try again, get up, go through the cycle of stumbling into the new reality. And so therefore, we're going to get there. I'm quite sure of it. Is how fast, how quickly, how efficiently we'll get there. It's an issue. So I think I like the community chat. I think it's a good initiative. I was very excited when I heard about this whole thing. And I want to see more podcasts, YouTube, online discussions from people in the Caribbean outside of entertainment. Entertainment have a bunch of them, but outside that, I don't see that much outside of it. I want to see more technology-based blogs like yourself being out there, promoting the benefits and the opportunities of the digital economy.
Thank you so much, Steve and Allison. I think this has been a very, good start to 2019. We had two topics that we really hadn't discussed before, and I think certainly is always interesting for me because you both submitted topics that seem, have no relationship to each other, but there often seems to be commonalities once the discussion starts.
Yes.
And I do find that so interesting. So thank you again.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you as well.
See you. Nice talking to you, Allison.
Likewise, Steve.
No problem. All right, good.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to the ICT Pulse podcast. You can find links to some of the things we talked about on our website, ict-pulse.com. If you like this episode, please show your support by leaving us a review on iTunes, as it will help others find the show. You can email us at info@ict-pulse.com or drop us a note on our Facebook page, facebook.com/ICTPulse, or via Twitter @ICTPulse. We hope you'll join us again for our next episode. Take care.